Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Dais, a podcast about the stories taking place in and around El Paso County, Colorado. I'm your host, Scott Anderson, and today I am joined by Joe Lewis, the founder and CEO of Angels of America's Fallen, and the 2023 El Paso County Veteran of the Year. How are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing well.
Good. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it. Before we get started, though, I want to add that if listeners are interested in more stories about people doing good in and around El Paso County, or hearing from county leadership about local government priorities and how they operate, you can find additional episodes of this podcast on your podcast platform of choice. But to get started today, Joe, I was wondering if you could share some background about yourself, let people know who you are and how you ended up where you are.
All right. So I'll start at the very beginning. So I was the son of a Marine who was infantry in Vietnam, and if he hadn't made it back from Vietnam, I never would have existed. So as a kid growing up, thinking about the impact when guys don't make it home and how far forward that goes and the ripples go forward, and then joined the Army National Guard right out of high school in small town Alabama, did field artillery through college and helped pay for college that way, and then the Marine Corps for 11 years, active duty after college. My back was broken during training in the Marine Corps, so I couldn't continue to fly ejection seat aircraft anymore. And I ended up transitioning out, went to the airlines, and flew for American Airlines just long enough to pay for my uniforms, and then 9/11 occurred. And then I really felt the calling to go back on active duty, and I did. And I was active with the Air National Guard, and so ended up actually retiring Air Force after that combination of the three services. When I was in the Marine Corps, I did carrier operations with the Navy. And then when I was doing the stuff with the Air National Guard, I did counter-narcotics, counter-narco-terrorism support for law enforcement, from Secret Service to local task forces, and supported the Coast Guard in some of those operations. And I ended up losing friends in every branch, and lost two buddies in the Marine Corps who had babies on the way. They never even got to meet. So thinking about how those kids have to grow up through their most crucial formative years without the guidance and support of one of their biggest mentors, generally the breadwinner of the family, it really was a significant impact to me personally, thinking about that and what would happen to my sons if I didn't make it home. So that's kind of my background, and it started, and going back to my dad's service, he quit high school and enlisted in the Marine Corps, and then he was actually on a ship off the coast of Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they issued live ammunition, and it was that close. And then he got out, got his GED, started going to college. The Vietnam War started, and he re-enlisted to go because he felt a calling, and so service was something that I just kind of grew up with, thinking about that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I have talked to quite a few veterans, and I usually hear that they stick within one service branch for the majority
Yes.
of their service. It sounds like you had jumped around a little bit. What was that like, going from the Army and the Marines? Can you tell me maybe some similarities and differences in those branches?
Well, first of all, it was great.
Uh-huh.
I never would have planned it that way. But, the exposure to the different cultures of each organization, and as well as people from all over the country and different personalities, was just great. And, some differences, there are cultural differences, and there are acronyms that are different, right? Mm-hmm. So before I was through with all this, it was hard to keep them all straight, right? So, but it was, each one had a different, unique piece to it, and I was doing different things in each one as well. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a clear-cut thing because it was a different career field, sorta, in each one. Although I did fly with the Air Force, but it was not ejection seat aircraft. It was a smaller reconnaissance platform. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I guess the biggest thing that jumps out to me was just, it was a great ride. Yeah. It was really cool.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And going back, talking about being part of each of those organizations, and then knowing individuals who did not have an opportunity to see unborn children.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like a bit of the impetus for Angels of America's Fallen and the organization that you founded and are the CEO of. Let's get into that, and can you tell me about, if I'm right about kind of the genesis of that, and then also just what the main mission of the organization is?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the genesis of it. It was something that it weighed heavily on me. And one of my best friends in flight school, was next door neighbor in flight school, he got EA6B Prowlers, and I ended up in F-18s, and so we were different locations. And shortly after we got our different aircraft, he was killed in a crash. And it was a really visible, highly visible crash because the commanding officer, the second in charge, him and another guy were in it, and he was the pilot. And it was low altitude training over the desert at 200 feet doing maneuvering, and it was really easy. You don't have much reaction time. They probably never knew they were about to hit the ground. But his wife dealt with that in part by just cutting off connection with all of us. Mm-hmm. And so wondering, because he had a little boy and I didn't have kids yet at the time, and wondering how his son was doing and who was encouraging him, throwing the ball for him, how is he going to grow up, was a really important part of that. So as I was getting close to retirement, I was at my son's soccer games. They were both in championship games in different age groups, but watching the goodness of them burning energy and interacting with their coach and the other players, and they were doing something good instead of being out there getting in trouble or something like that. And I didn't hear a booming voice of God, but I really felt a calling that I was supposed to do something to help kids of our fallen, to make sure they had that outlet instead of being withdrawn and depressed or running with the wrong crowd and getting in trouble. So that was it. It was not what I expected to do. I surprised my wife at Dairy Queen after the game with the kids and said, this is what I was going to do. And I had no background in that.
Right.
So yeah, when I retired, I did some research first. Sure. I looked into it and I found out how many kids there were at the time. And this was in 2010. There were over 16,000 military kids under 18 who had lost their military parent. And so that let me know it really had to be a full-time effort. It couldn't be a little thing because the need was so great. And so in 2012, started it right at the end and got recognized as a 501c3 in 2013. So that was really the beginning of it here. Mm-hmm. Pulled into town in an RV and said, this is the spot, parked it and started the organization. And really grassroots starts because I didn't have any connections here before. So I thought this would be a great community for it, but it turned out it really, really was because the connections and the support came really quickly. So yeah, that was the beginning of Angels of America's Fallen, was personal experience, losing guys that had kids and wondering about how they would do, and then doing research. Let me back up too, because I found that there was initial grief counseling, and then maybe a summer camp or a fun trip to Disney or something in the middle, but then scholarships, a lot of scholarship options once they became adults, but in between, not a whole lot. And it really struck me that, they're in their local community, and if they go off to one of these summer camps, well, then they come back. Well, what about the other 51 weeks of the year? And did some research and looked at and saw the positive benefits of sports, arts, music, the impact a coach has in a kid's life. Mm-hmm. And so our mission at Angels of America's Fallen is to honor the loss and sacrifice of our fallen by supporting the dreams of their children, helping them get into sports, music, arts, basically some healthy passion that has a coach or an instructor component. And when we enroll them to be, we make a commitment that we're going to be there for them all the way until the age of 19 without them ever having to reapply and possibly losing their outlet.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And I usually don't talk too much personally about myself on this podcast, but this strikes a particular chord with me. I lost my father when I was a child, not military. He died of cancer, but your comment about just being involved in things like sports and music to kind of get them out and get them thinking and get them involved, and definitely rings true. It was music for me. Yeah. I did sports. I grew up in Houston. Everyone's sports in Houston, but music was the particular thing for me, and it gave me something to latch onto, and it did a job of carrying me through those years up until I graduated from high school. And so, personally, I can absolutely see the benefit that comes from having something like that. I was fortunate to be in a position where I, didn't need that direction. It was always something I was kind of drawn to. So, I wanted to do that, but so it was something I was already introduced to. But, that's not something that everybody has visibility of, and not something that might come naturally when thinking about, hey, how can we help this child, get through this time. So no, I think it's incredible that an organization like this exists, and I want to get into a little bit more about how you set things up, because I always find this fascinating. You know, you talk about how it was a grassroots campaign. You just kind of stuck a flag in the ground, let's say, here in Colorado Springs and got started. But I mean, at this point, just about 10 years later, you're a national organization. I mean, how do you go from being, you know, let's start here in Colorado Springs to a national organization in that amount of time?
Well, the intent was always to be national because these kids are all over the country. And then another one thing that's kind of unique about the military families, and we support military and first responders. So I want to make sure that's clear. So police, fire, EMS. But with military kids, generally, you know, they've been uprooted, or they're like, if you ask a military kid where they're from, it takes them a while, right? Because they've been all over.
Yeah.
So what we see is that a lot of times then this remaining parent, and generally that's a mom, but we've got dads in our program, and a lot of times they'll move back to where they're from.
Sure.
And then it doesn't quite feel right. They've been gone for a while, or maybe the community's not that supportive, or whatever it is. So sometimes they'll move back to a favorite duty station, and then they get there, and then that doesn't feel right either because they're not part of the unit, that kind of a thing. So they tend to move a few times, trying to find a place that feels like home. So that was one of the thoughts, was like, no matter where they are, no matter where they move, we want them engaged in their local community doing something that's right there. So that was one of the thoughts. But, you know, I didn't know anything about nonprofits when I started this. I mean, the first book I read was Why Nonprofits Fail, because I knew the mission was big enough that it didn't need to fail. It needed to be done right.
Right.
So I enrolled at UCCS in the Masters of Public Administration program, and did that and 3 graduate certificates: nonprofit management, development, and evaluation. And that was part of the community piece because I made a lot of connections there, and I was able to do a direct application of what I was learning. And so connections with the other students that were in a similar program with a similar public service kind of mindset was really a helpful part of it too. So, and then one of the professors there, joined our board and had a tremendous knowledge base of policies and everything, and really helped us build from the beginning to be ready to be a national organization.
Yeah, and you mentioned a professor joining the board. How do you get people to invest in and believe in that vision? Because again, you know, you were the one that had this idea and wanted to get it started, but it takes a village to do that kind of thing. How did you find the right people that resonated with the mission that you had in mind to be able to continue that success?
Well, at the beginning, I just asked guys that I knew from each branch of the military that I knew would tell me if I was doing something stupid.
Okay.
So that sounded good at the beginning, but they didn't know how to be on a board, so it wasn't really the right fit.
Yeah.
So then it was, as I was telling people about what I did, what I found really, there was a connection point for pretty much everybody to this mission, whether you're military or have an affiliation with that, or law enforcement or fire or whatever. You probably were a kid that got engaged in sports, music, or arts or something, or saw the influence of a coach or an instructor, or you didn't and really wish you did. Yeah. So really there's something for everybody. And I think that was it. It was that when people heard the mission, then they would offer and say, well, what can I do to help? And then finding those that had the background to be on the board, out of that group was kind of a crucial piece of it.
Yeah. No, that's always something that fascinates me because it's not something I have very little knowledge about myself. I would also have to read a lot of books to get it figured out. And, finding somebody who connects with what you are thinking and wanting to do, I feel like initially would be pretty difficult to look in the right places. Did it take you a couple of times to maybe not stop and start necessarily, but to really feel like you hit your groove and were then, moving along with the organization?
Yes. Because we're still figuring out exactly how we were doing what we were doing too. And so, you get some people, and the other thing is a lot of people have good intentions and then life gets in the way.
Sure.
So somebody that maybe did have the background and would join, but then something happens health-wise or whatever. And so, but that's one of the good things about having a board and term limits is that you get a constant refresh of people. So you're getting new ideas and new perspectives and those kinds of things. So that was a help as well.
And another thing that I've learned is, it's more than just the one organization that does the thing. You have a lot of connections, especially when you're going from, I would imagine, from a grassroots thing to a national thing.
Yeah.
A lot of other organizations are there to either guide you or maybe partner with you. Can you talk about some of those connections you made with other organizations and how it benefited the programs that you guys work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So Fort Carson has a survivor outreach service office. And so they support not just the Army, but all different branches. And and connecting through them. And then one of the widows that we supported knew the colonel that had been in charge of starting that office at Fort Carson, and he had retired and was starting Mount Carmel Veteran Service Center here in town. So she put me in touch with Bob McLaughlin, and it was we were kind of starting at about the same time. So it was a good partnership to be able to watch what they were doing, and we continue to be partners with them today, and they've supported us in multiple ways with office space and opportunities, and we've referred some of our families there for services as well, because a big part of what we did, we started with a laser focus on the kids, right? Get the kids involved in these activities. And then when we started doing this, we realized how often we were interacting with the remaining parent. And when you help the child, you help the parent, but also when you help the parent, you help the child. Mm-hmm. And what we found was a lot of them didn't know about some of the opportunities and things they might qualify for. So we just naturally began referring them to other things like Mount Carmel and Homefront Military Cares Network and those kinds of things as well. And so through those partnerships and through this relationship and hearing what the families needed, it turned into some referrals, it turned into case management, it turned into peer support as well. Finding a family that's new and in the struggle, but knowing one we've been supporting for a while that's a little further in the journey, and knowing that they could probably help each other and making those connections. And then having events and, organizations and businesses here in town have been absolutely, incredibly supportive.
Yeah.
And so when we would have an event and our families would come to it, they would just instantly connect. The kids wouldn't talk about the loss necessarily, but they would just click all of a sudden. Yeah. And then the moms would be laughing and, just see a lot of goodness through that. And then as we grew, we'd started to find other things. So like recently we had a young girl that had a really, really tough start. Her father was Army, he was retired, and he had some PTSD and some issues with that. And on the mom's birthday, he shot and killed the mom and then killed himself in front of the child, in front of the 4-year-old son and the 18-month-old daughter. And so they were raised by the grandparents. Well, the grandparents, weren't really financially prepared for that and everything, and the family didn't qualify for benefits because his PTSD wasn't well documented. So they kind of fell through the cracks. And then when she was 15, her grandparents both passed away within a few months of each other. And in that process, then she lost the only real parent she had known, as well as her home and her dog, because she moved in with a neighbor who had kind of been prepared to become her guardian, right, but didn't really want a dog. So that was a lot. And a few months after that, the guardian reached out to us and said, man, I really think she needs a dog. And we got in touch with Victory Service Dogs, another nonprofit here in town, and collaborated with them. And it was awesome because they had somebody that donated a puppy that was born coincidentally on the day that I contacted them asking about whether they could make this thing happen or not. Mm-hmm. And so they provided a dog, and then the girl was involved in the training of this dog to be a service dog for herself. So it just worked out incredibly well. Yeah. So we find those kinds of partnerships. And just yesterday, I met with the Special Operations Foundation here in town, and we're doing a memorandum of understanding, MOU, and partnering as well for what we can refer people to, our families to them for things that they provide, as well as them looking at who they've got supported and finding, if they've got some of the families where the kids would qualify for our program as well.
Yeah. That's incredible. And I would call it maybe a loose connection, but with just in speaking with El Paso County, we have a little bit of connection with Angels of America's Fallen. Colin, who is one of the angels, or one of the kids, do you refer to them as the angels, right?
Yeah.
He has had the opportunity to sing the national anthem at the El Paso County Fair. He did it for our State of the Region 2 years ago. And let me tell you, that kid can sing.
Oh, yeah.
It was absolutely incredible. And obviously I don't want to speak for him or the situation, but, to me, it seemed that clearly this organization has touched this kid because he has been able to connect with music and use it to not just benefit his life and I'm sure his immediate family's life, but all of us who were there, who were able to experience it. I mean, it really was a moment. I don't think that I have heard a louder standing ovation for an event for a national anthem, and it was really, really incredible. So, in my very little experience in connection with the organization, that's something I saw that, really hit me as wow, something's happening here. And so, are you able to offer maybe another personal story or two of those kids who've been able to take, this connection with your organization and spin it forward into those type of moments for them?
Yeah, actually, maybe that's kind of a good segue to talk about another thing with us. So Colin's father was exposed to toxic burn pits, and he had very aggressive cancers that it was very rapid. And when we looked at this originally, there's some organizations that might be for combat fatalities only or whatever. And we looked at it and said, to the child, it doesn't matter how. They've had 100% loss of mom or dad. So we support the kids regardless of whether it was a combat fatality or training accident or cancers or invisible wounds, died by suicide. All those things matter, and their sacrifice matters, and the family sacrifice continues. So that's a key thing. And with Colin, I'll just go back to this. So he started with soccer, and the whole singing thing was just a kind of a side gig. We asked,
impressive side gig, man.
Yeah, right. So we asked if we had any kids locally that wanted to sing the national anthem. I think it was for our golf tournament, and he did. And he was really good. So now he does some voice lessons as well as the soccer. But he performed at our gala this year. He and his younger sister did a soccer demo. He sang the national anthem. And I tell you, he gets better every time he does it.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it's super impressive.
Yeah.
But for another kind of cool story, we had a little girl that started in piano, then interest changed, and she did violin, and then she did several other things. But she took baking lessons.
Okay.
And it was culinary arts, it fits the bill. Anything that's positive that has a coach or an instructor component, we're going to say yes to.
Yeah.
Right? And the families pick where in town, and they vet who they want to go to. It's not like we tell them where they've got to do this. But she really liked the baking thing, so she started making cookies, and then she started a company. And so Kiera Bear's Kitchen makes these awesome cookies, and she's done really well with that. And now she's a senior, or she actually just graduated, and she's going to go to Embry-Riddle. And she's going to do, it is forensic psychology and global security.
Jeez.
And so just really awesome kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the cookie business is going to go on hold while she's doing that. But she said when she comes back, when she visits, she'll make some more cookies, and they're awesome.
You can always get me with a good cookie, man.
Yeah. So you never know where their interests are going to take them.
Yeah.
We had another. This was a little girl in Georgia, and during COVID, the whole world's crashing, kind of a thing. And she already had the loss, and now you get this in fear of potential loss of other family members. And she ended up in the ICU, severely anorexic, and had no interest in anything. And so, one of the things we do, part of this case management, is reaching out to the families and, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And sometimes, as a parent, especially as a single parent, the kids are hearing you tell them everything. Clean up your room, get ready for school, all this. So they kind of don't want to hear more.
Yeah.
So our case managers sometimes get on the phone with the kids and suggest, well, what about this? And what about that? Kind of take that piece.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, with her, it was equestrian therapy that we got her in. And it just clicked with her. And so now she is a personal chef for a family with some dietary restrictions. She's 16 now, I think.
Yeah.
And her interests then are being a chef or a dietitian going forward. And that comes from, where she had previously been severely anorexic. So you never know what that spark's going to be or what that impact's going to be.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing out of this too is you never know what it'll be. And sometimes maybe you don't have a career in whatever you find, right? But it helps bridge that gap until, you can sort of center yourself, become an adult, and understand how to operate a little bit better in your headspace than when you're a kid. Because, boy, when I was a kid, a lot of work required. And so it's just one of those things that is really heartening to see these type of organizations exist and be reaching out to people. And I think that's one nice thing is it feels like there's a bit of a built-in network with your connection to the armed forces and to EMS and PD. There's a bit of you kind of know where you're looking to try and help people out. If there are people, however, that you may not be aware of, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you guys and know if maybe they can you can help provide them services?
So our website aoafallen.org has information. It's got some videos about some of the families we support and things like that. And it's got Get Involved tab. And there you can see our upcoming events, and you can sign up for newsletters, and you can get connected with us through that. Because we're always looking for volunteers, or, you can refer that to other families that you might know across the nation. If you know of a family that, has just had a loss or whatever, has kids that, again, all it takes to qualify is that mom or dad served and gave all, right? So military, police, fire, EMS, and, getting on the waiting list. Unfortunately, we do have a waiting list because the need is so great. But even while they're on the waiting list, we still support them with newsletters and information and some of the referral pieces. And we have what we call lessons from Lila. And so for any of the kids on the waiting list, we want to get them swimming lessons if they don't know how to swim. And it started because of a really tough story. Air Force Master Sergeant, Special Operations guy that had multiple combat deployments and was killed in a parachute training accident. He had 6 kids. And this was early on. This was, I think, our beginning of the second year for us. And his family went on the waiting list. So 6 kids on the waiting list. And then it was maybe 7 or 8 months later, we were able to move them off and call to say, hey, we can get your 6 kids in activities, move them off the waiting list, which is always a real positive call. And in this one, the mom, Alyssa, said, I only have 5 now. My 2-year-old Lila just drowned. And it absolutely crushed me. The first family we ever supported was local. It was the first the first chaplain to die in combat since Vietnam, and he had 3 sons. And so we got the kids engaged and did swimming lessons for them. And the youngest one was so little, we did mommy and me swim classes. So anytime we had infants, then we'd say, hey, let's get them in this as soon as they're able. And with Lila, it didn't happen in time, and I couldn't go back and fix it. And so I thought, well, what can I do about this? And I called Alyssa and I said, I don't have the budget for this, but I'm just going to try to convince swim centers to give life safety swimming lessons to all the kids on the waiting list. And said, I'd like to name this after Lila. And she was really moved by that. And she came up with a name, Lessons from Lila, which kind of rolls well. So that's what we started doing. And so we still continue to do that, as well as any of the kids that are currently enrolled. Let's say basketball's their thing. We'll say, okay, that's great. But if you don't know how to swim, let's get you in that too. So, and a powerful story with Alyssa. So her husband was killed in the training accident. And then it was 18 months later when Lila drowned. And around the same time, one of her brothers was murdered and one of them committed suicide. And she was raising 5 kids alone. And you hear post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's also post-traumatic stress growth. And she completed a doctorate in clinical psychology and is an expert helping others heal with their grief now. And she came back and was one of our keynote speakers a few years ago at a gala at the Broadmoor.
That's I mean, it's wild, it's sad, it's unfortunate, but what you are able to take from a negative experience and find, how can we find the positive in that? I mean, I think that really speaks to the mission of the organization and having that mindset of just helping, right? It sounds simple, but it's really what it is. Like, how can we just help?
And so one of the things that I say very frequently is we honor the loss and sacrifice, but we focus on positives and possibilities. And so we see that also in what we kind of developed organically, because we had some of our parents and kids that were willing to tell their story to help us raise awareness and resources to support others, basically paying it forward to families that are going to come behind them. So we call that our Voices program. And what we learned really quickly was, when they go to this, they're opening wounds to tell their story. But just like going to the gym and tearing your muscles, micro tears, you grow back stronger, and there's healing and helping. And so again, when they go and do that, at our Angel Gala, which is our biggest fundraiser, we have the keynotes are always our supported families. So it's them telling their story, and then the kids perform. And so the kids are performing and building their self-confidence in the activity that we've been supporting them in. So it's just a lot of goodness all wrapped up in that, but absolutely focusing on the positives.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I want to switch gears a little bit here. You were recognized as the 2023 Veteran of the Year just a couple weeks ago. Tell me, why that's important to you. Like, well, why it sounds incredible and is of course a very big honor, but for you specifically, like, and personally, like, why is that such a big honor?
Well, first, it was a big surprise because this community has a lot of veterans doing a lot of good things. So absolutely an honor to have even been considered for that. And didn't even know I was nominated. It was one of our employees did that. So that was pretty awesome. But so, yes, it's a big honor. But also what really impacts me about it is I was recognized for things that other people have helped me do that I couldn't have done without others. So going back again to the board, the staff, and the volunteers, that's why I got recognized, was because of their efforts carrying, I planted a flag and they've been carrying it, helping me carry it ever since. Yeah. So I think it gave me an honor feel. It gave me a community feel, which is another thing, because really, when I moved here, I didn't know anybody. Right. So that's pretty awesome. And but it really made me reflect and look again at how valuable and how great our supporters are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that is, you mentioned the community, and that's one thing that I think is fairly unique about El Paso County is the military community that exists here. Yeah. With the number of military bases that are here, you've got the Air Force Academy, and clearly there's a mindset for that military community here. To your point, there are a number of veterans that live here, and so speak to me a little bit more about just the community and what it means to be able to not only have the organization here, but to be recognized as a veteran within this community. Like, how does that all kind of wrap up for you in terms of, like, this really is the right place for me to be?
Oh, yeah. Well, at the beginning, one thing about Colorado Springs and El Paso County altogether is there are so many nonprofits here, right? So this is a community of people helping others, whether that's military, first responder, whatever it is. So it was great to learn and network at the beginning. And then you see the businesses as well. I'm kind of blown away. None of the business owners have to donate, support, sponsor anything, but they choose to. Mm-hmm. And some of them have just really, really attached themselves to our mission, and they support us every year, and there's just tremendous support from that. And then they became our friends because, again, we first moved here, didn't know anybody. So our friends, our family has really grown from the support around the organization. Mm-hmm. And then, it is a big military community, but we're also really supportive of our police and fire here. Mm-hmm. And so making connections with both of them and having the police chief and the fire chief, come to our gala and be supportive of us. And I've got another story that I want to tell. Yeah. That there was a young boy whose father was a police officer, who wasn't in Colorado, and his father was killed. And there was some unusual circumstances around it where there was one of the police officers who was having an affair with a dispatcher, and the dispatcher's husband found out about it, and he shot the wrong guy and killed this boy's father. And the department kind of dealt with it by hushing it. Mm-hmm. And so they really didn't do anything for the family, and they didn't really recognize him as a child of a fallen, and it was just kind of unfortunate. Yeah. And so he came out here to perform at our gala, played guitar, played Dust in the Wind, which was a song his dad had learned on the guitar. Yeah. It was pretty cool. So, we're supporting him in guitar lessons. But when I was at UCCS, one of the guys in my class was Lieutenant John Koch, who is with the police department, and got to know him through that. And I reached out to him and told him the story, and they absolutely wrapped their arms around this young man. And they came out to the gala. They presented him a proclamation and stood there by him on the stage, and it was awesome. And that's a sense of community where, I don't know other places where that might happen, but that's the kind of community, or that's the kind of police department we've got. That's the kind of fire department we've got. Mm-hmm. So all those things, I don't know, it's really impressive. And I've lived a lot of places. Yeah. And I've been to all 50 states at least twice, except for Minnesota. I've only been there once. But and I've worked with people from every state, every single one, because one of the programs I ran was specific to each state's counter-narcotics program, where the National Guard supports it. So each state and U.S. territory, and I haven't found a place like this.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. We're sort of getting to the end of the interview here, but I did want to give you an opportunity to add anything else that you think would be important for listeners to know about.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is people generally don't think about the kids. We honor our fallen, and we're pretty good about that, and that's awesome. But most of them, a lot of them, have young kids, And so they've got young spouses, and these families have their own trauma, and they've got, some unfortunately, some of the suicides are in front of the families, or right there in the home. And the toxic exposure to burn pits, that's still a price of 2 decades of war that we're continuing to pay, and that's really tough. And you watch your loved one, your protector, wither and die in front of you. That's really tough. So, thinking about the families and thinking that, while they're kids, that's the most crucial formative years. And as a nation, we should stand by and pay it forward to the children of those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country and communities.
Yeah.
And so, a final thought is that we could use your support. We are only limited. This was designed to be very scalable because we're not creating the programs. We're connecting the kids with programs that already exist in their community, and we're making the payments for those, and then we're doing the case management and so on. So the only limiting factor for us supporting more kids and moving more kids off the waiting list is, resources. And so whether you can, help us by sharing our social media posts or whatever, or a business or an organization that's looking for a charity for their event, those kinds of things. There's a lot of ways you can connect with us. And it's really impactful to these families.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate you taking the time today for sharing these stories and for all the work that you do, not just here in El Paso County, but around the country. So thank you for taking the time and for being here.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and it's an honor to support these families.
Thank you. If you are interested in listening to additional episodes of Beyond the Dais, be sure to look for us on Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.